Barron Trump stepped from his SUV and approached La Bijou, a restaurant famed for flawless service and lavish cuisine. The uniformed doorman halted briefly upon recognizing him, then forced a polite nod, opening the door onto a gleaming foyer. Inside, chandeliers glowed over marble floors, and well-dressed patrons lowered their voices as Barron checked in with a hostess who struggled to mask her nerves. She guided him into a softly lit dining area where candlelit tables and murmuring diners projected refinement. Yet Barron sensed tension, as though every nearby glance carried an undercurrent of disapproval. He was seated by tall windows, offered a leather menu, and left to peruse dishes like lobster ravioli and braised lamb. A waiter soon placed a glass of sparkling water that tasted oddly bitter. Barron set it aside, uncertain if it was a simple oversight. A young server named Lorraine introduced herself, her eyes flicking nervously toward a tall, suited man near the bar. Barron ordered the lobster ravioli starter and venison, medium rare. Minutes passed without bread or amuse-bouches. Other tables, seated later, received prompt attention. Eavesdropping on hushed remarks, Barron noticed references to "that name" and uneasy glances in his direction. At last, Lorraine arrived with the appetizer. Though elegant in presentation, the ravioli's lobster was nearly raw. Barron pointed out the undercooking, and Lorraine took the plate back, apologizing. Some patrons watched with thinly veiled interest. The manager emerged, whispering with a smug-looking patron. Soon the same dish reappeared, still undercooked. The manager placed it before Barron, feigning courtesy. "Our chef is exacting," he said dismissively. Barron stayed calm. "I'd prefer it safe to eat." Nearby, a man in an expensive suit raised his glass in a mocking salute. Lorraine hovered by the corner, looking trapped. Barron exhaled, deciding to see if his entree might be better. More time crawled by. Whispers and sideways stares multiplied. Finally, the venison arrived, charred on the outside, raw at the center. Its acrid smell underscored the sabotage. Summoning the manager, Barron asked directly, "Would you rather I leave?" The man hesitated, exchanging a glance with the smug patron. "Some of our regulars have strong preferences," he replied, vague yet revealing. Barron rose, placing cash on the table. "I won't stay where I'm unwelcome." He nodded to Lorraine, who looked stricken. Several onlookers gawked, some filming discreetly. The smug patron smirked triumphantly. Barron refused to dignify him with an outburst. Stepping outside, Barron inhaled the cool air. Though hungry, he felt relief at escaping the restaurant's toxic game. He suspected rumors would spread, with supporters and detractors spinning their own versions. But one fact stood out. La Bijou had bowed to petty malice, serving half-raw shellfish and scorched meat to drive him away. Barron departed with dignity intact, leaving them to their own shame. Still, the evening's tension had weighed on him like a damp cloak. Normally, he might have shrugged off awkward service or a few sideways glances. Yet from the moment he stepped inside, the undercurrent had been unmistakable. The hush in the foyer, the hostess's wavering smile, the staff's collective reluctance to engage, all of it suggested a coordinated effort. He couldn't help wondering who in that restaurant held enough sway to orchestrate such hostility. As he stood on the sidewalk, he recalled how certain diners had stared as though anticipating a conflict. He'd seen phone screens angled discreetly, capturing the spectacle. Perhaps some sought viral footage of him storming out. Others might have craved a scandal to fuel their dinner gossip. Either way, the entire evening had felt like stepping onto a stage set for humiliation. He tried piecing together the timeline, the suspiciously bitter water, the raw lobster, the incinerated yet uncooked venison. Those couldn't all be accidental mishaps in an establishment known for culinary excellence. Someone had likely issued quiet directives. The manager's glances at that one table, the smug man's expression whenever Barron locked eyes with him, it all pointed to a plan to make him so uncomfortable that he'd leave. Barron wondered if they'd expected him to throw a fit. Instead, he'd chosen calm confrontation. Walking out, albeit hungry, felt better than allowing their orchestrated sabotage to reduce him to outrage. Whether they realized it or not, their petty scheme had only exposed the depths of their prejudice. He pictured Lorraine's anguished face as she delivered undercooked food. She seemed forced by unseen pressures. Perhaps the truth would emerge. Barron hoped she wouldn't be blamed. Then again, places that stoop to sabotage might punish anyone who reveals their complicity. In times past, he might have confronted the manager publicly or demanded to see the chef. Tonight, though, everything stank of a setup, and he refused to hand them the outburst they wanted. Beyond feeling hungry, he felt disappointed that such spite could lurk behind a facade of sophistication. Eventually, Barron turned away from La Bijou's ornate doors. Once in the car, he sank into the seat, replaying every detail. The driver asked if all was well. Barron offered a small smile. "I've had better dinners," he said. He considered trying another restaurant but was too drained. Streetlights flashed across the windows as they navigated toward his building, while Barron composed a mental summary. Raw seafood, charred venison, a manager hinting powerful regulars demanded his departure. Perhaps phone videos would surface, or staff might leak details. La Bijou's management could deny wrongdoing, but too many saw the sabotage firsthand. He remembered the older couple's sympathetic nods. Maybe they'd post about the fiasco online, shining light on how the staff caved to petty influence. Barron felt no urge for revenge. He believed truth would surface regardless. Fiddling with his phone, he typed a few notes. Sabotage at La Bijou. Underestimated how far they'd go. Left calmly. Paid for nothing but water. Dignity intact. Saving it, he realized the sting of the night lingered, but he took solace in refusing to stoop to their level. If that was their best attempt at humiliating him, so be it. At home, he realized the city's glossy veneer still concealed pockets of cruel bias. La Bijou's fiasco confirmed that. Yet he reminded himself that composure could be the best armor. Let them spin their tales. He knew what truly happened, and so did many who witnessed it. Thus ended a dinner meant for tranquility, upended by cruelty disguised as fine dining. The next morning, the buzzing of Barron's phone woke him earlier than usual. A close friend had already sent 3 messages, each linking to short videos uploaded overnight. Bleary-eyed, Barron tapped the first link. It opened to a clip posted on a social media platform, showing a snippet of the previous night's drama at La Bijou. Although the footage was grainy, he recognized the restaurant's opulent interior and glimpsed himself in the corner of the frame, speaking quietly to the manager. He scrubbed a hand over his face as he watched the awkward exchange captured on someone's phone. The video ended just before he stood and left. Another clip showed the moment the manager laid down the half-raw venison, with scattered murmurs from other diners. The text overlay read, "Sabotage or poor cooking. Barron Trump's weird night." The comments section was a free-for-all of opinions. Some said he was being overly sensitive. Others claimed the restaurant had conspired against him. Barron's friend had also sent a link to a local gossip site covering the story under the headline, "Prominent Name Meets Raw Deal at La Bijou?" Some details were accurate, mention of suspiciously undercooked dishes and the frosty manager, while others were pure speculation, like rumors that Barron had verbally attacked the staff. He groaned at that distortion. He'd been nothing but calm, yet rumors often took on a life of their own. He dragged himself out of bed, brewed a cup of coffee, then sat down to scan more reactions. Another friend texted him, "You okay? Saw you trending." Barron typed back a reassuring line, though inside he felt a swirl of annoyance. He disliked seeing personal moments turned into public debate, especially one as frustrating as last night's fiasco. Turning on the TV, he caught a local morning show's segment. A panel of talking heads discussed hospitality versus hostility, referencing an unnamed young public figure who allegedly faced sabotage. The anchors hypothesized whether the restaurant had been influenced by a powerful patron. Someone remarked that no manager would risk a lawsuit by serving half-raw shellfish unless pressured. Barron sipped his coffee grimly. At least a few voices recognized the situation for what it was. By midday, he received word that a prominent blogger had posted an exposé. They'd interviewed someone claiming to be a former La Bijou employee who asserted that certain VIP patrons could indeed dictate how other guests were treated. The article all but confirmed that the manager had orchestrated the fiasco. Barron felt a flicker of vindication, though it came wrapped in cynicism. So it wasn't just him imagining conspiracies. The question was whether the revelation would change anything. To clear his head, he left his apartment for a walk. Hustling past glass towers and bustling storefronts, he tried to regain a sense of normalcy. Yet passers-by occasionally did double takes, likely connecting him to the day's viral story. He overheard a snippet of conversation from two women walking behind him. "I heard that restaurant served him raw lobster on purpose." "Unreal." The second woman replied, "Yeah, but who knows if it's real? People love drama." Barron turned a corner and nearly ran into a journalist, microphone in hand, who recognized him instantly. "Mr. Trump, any statement on La Bijou's alleged sabotage last night?" she asked, a camera operator right behind her. He grimaced inwardly, forcing a polite smile. "I have no statement. I'm sure the facts will come out on their own." Then he pivoted and strode away, ignoring follow-up questions about whether he planned legal action. An hour later, his phone buzzed with yet another call, this time from a reporter for a major paper. He let it go to voicemail. He wasn't in the mood to feed the news cycle. Instead, he wandered into a quiet cafe, hoping to find a moment's peace. Inside, the barista gave him a curious glance but said nothing as he ordered tea and sat near the window. Sipping slowly, he considered how best to handle this swirling mess of attention. He received a text from an acquaintance who worked in PR. "If you want to control the narrative, do a quick interview with a reputable outlet. Otherwise, rumors run wild." Barron weighed it. Did he owe the public an explanation? He'd simply tried to eat at a restaurant. The idea of staging a press conference over undercooked lobster felt absurd. By the time he finished his tea, he concluded that silence might be the better option. High-profile names often found themselves in controversies that blew over once a news scandal arrived. People enjoyed gossip, but they also had short memories. So long as no one was physically harmed, the La Bijou incident might fade from the headlines soon enough. Deciding to channel his frustration productively, he headed downtown for a charity meeting he'd scheduled. The organization aimed to provide vocational training to underserved youth, and Barron had pledged to help fund an upcoming initiative. As he entered the modest office building, the friendly staff greeted him with genuine warmth, a stark contrast to the forced smiles and hidden sneers of La Bijou. He spent the afternoon discussing proposals for tech workshops and internship opportunities, immersing himself in something that felt meaningful and positive. During a break, one coordinator brought up the rumors. "I'm sorry about what happened. People can be awful," she said quietly. Barron gave a shrug. "At least it's reminding me to focus on better things." She offered him gratitude for not letting the controversy overshadow the day's philanthropic goals. By early evening, his phone was again cluttered with messages about the raw lobster scandal. Another restaurant manager, this time from a rival establishment, had publicly invited Barron to dine with them free of charge, calling it an apology on behalf of the hospitality industry. The gesture felt well-meaning, but also opportunistic. Barron politely declined. He wasn't interested in turning every meal into a statement. Returning home, he powered down most alerts, wanting a quiet night. Yet curiosity pushed him to check one final update, a short piece from a respected columnist who typically steered clear of tabloid drama. The columnist's stance was refreshingly balanced, concluding that if certain elites had weaponized a restaurant against Barron, it reflected more on them than him. They urged readers to question any venue so beholden to malicious demands. Barron closed the article, exhaling slowly. At least one voice in the media recognized the broader issue, how petty grudges and power plays could taint even the simplest human activity. Sharing a meal, resolving to put the fiasco behind him, he tried to focus on the coming days. But as he drifted off that night, a gnawing feeling remained, The sabotage had tapped into deeper currents of prejudice and influence, and he suspected it wouldn't be the final time he encountered such hostility. 2 days later, Barron found himself pacing the lobby of a glass-walled corporate building, waiting for an elevator that seemed to take forever. He'd come to meet with an influential investor about supporting the same youth-focused charity he'd discussed earlier. The entire morning, he'd braced for more questions about the Bijou incident. It seemed everyone from random bloggers to mainstream outlets still wanted his perspective. The elevator finally arrived, and he stepped in, relieved that it was empty. Yet as he reached the 20th floor and walked into a stylish reception area, he was greeted by an assistant who immediately recognized him. Her face revealed a flicker of curiosity. "Mr. Trump, Mr. Hazelton will see you shortly," she said. While he waited on a leather sofa, he scrolled through messages. A handful were from acquaintances asking if he'd seen the new piece in the Chronicle. He tapped open the link. Sure enough, the Chronicle had published a deep dive feature, "When Influence Trumps Hospitality." It recounted alleged stories of restaurants capitulating to well-connected patrons who demanded special treatment, or demanded that unwanted guests be harassed until they left. The article even mentioned La Bijou's raw lobster fiasco as a prime example of how staff might sabotage a disliked individual. Barron felt a pang of anger, remembering how powerless that moment had felt. "Mr. Trump," the assistant's voice pulled him back. "Mr. Hazelton is ready." Barron followed her into a corner office that boasted panoramic views of the city skyline. A tall, silver-haired man rose from behind a massive desk and extended his hand. "Glad to finally meet in person," Hazelton said, gesturing for Barron to sit. The meeting began cordially enough, with Barron outlining the charity's mission. Hazelton listened intently, asking questions about the scope of vocational training and how funds would be allocated. But after a while, he leaned back, folding his hands. "I've heard about your recent restaurant incident," he said. "It must be unsettling to see the lengths some people will go." Barron offered a polite nod. "I didn't expect so much attention over a bad meal, but here we are." He tried to keep his tone neutral. The last thing he wanted was to rehash the entire fiasco. Hazelton frowned sympathetically. "I've known the owner of La Bijou for years, surprised he'd allow that nonsense, though perhaps he's not the one pulling strings. Power can come from many corners." Barron recalled the smug patron who'd orchestrated much of it. "It seemed the staff felt compelled to follow certain instructions," he replied, choosing his words carefully. After a pause, Hazelton switched gears, focusing on how his potential donation could help the charity's programs. Barron explained the planned workshops. They agreed on a tentative figure. The mood felt hopeful, overshadowing the unpleasant talk of sabotage. Barron was grateful for the shift. However, as they wrapped up, Hazelton tapped a pen against the desk. "Before you go, I'd like to mention something. I know some people who move in those circles, where a single phone call can cause trouble at any venue. If you ever suspect another setup, let me know. We can't stop every petty tyrant, but we can shine light on them. Sometimes that's enough." Barron offered a grateful smile, though he wasn't sure how comfortable he felt about enlisting more powerful allies. Still, the gesture seemed genuine. He thanked Hazelton and left with a handshake, stepping into the elevator with renewed optimism about the charity's future. Later that afternoon, he had another errand on his schedule: lunch with a friend at a bistro known for its relaxed vibe. Even stepping into an eatery now felt fraught with potential drama, yet the bistro's interior proved bright and bustling, with cheerful servers and diverse patrons who hardly gave Barron a second glance. He exhaled, relieved that not every place was a cauldron of tension. He joined his friend, Amelia, who was already sipping iced tea. She greeted him with a concerned smile. "You good? The internet's been wild about that sabotage story." Barron waved it off. "It's mostly blown out of proportion, but yeah, it was unpleasant." He didn't want to dwell on negative details. They chatted about Amelia's photography exhibit and the charity's developments. Their orders arrived promptly: caprese sandwiches, crisp salads, no half-raw nonsense or conspiratorial glares. Midway through lunch, Barron's phone vibrated. He saw Lorraine's name flash on the screen. Surprised, he told Amelia he needed a minute. stepping outside. "Lorraine, how did you get my number?" he asked gently, recalling the distressed young server from La Bijou. She sounded nervous but determined. "I asked around. I'm sorry if this is intrusive, I just needed to talk to you." Barron assured her it was fine. Hesitant, Lorraine explained that she'd quit her job. The sabotage at La Bijou had shaken her, and she refused to be part of a workplace so willing to harm a guest's experience. "I gave my notice," she said quietly, "and the manager threatened to blacklist me in the industry." Barron's chest tightened. "That's awful. Are you all right? Do you need help?" Lorraine insisted she would manage, but wanted him to know the fiasco was no accident. A specific patron had demanded the staff handle Barron. The manager, terrified of losing that patron's goodwill, complied. "I just wanted you to hear the truth," she whispered. "Some staff tried to protest, but we were silenced." He thanked Lorraine, heart sinking at how quickly an entire establishment could be subverted by a powerful individual. She ended the call, and Barron returned to Amelia, explaining briefly that the sabotage was confirmed by an insider. Amelia looked troubled. "I hope that poor girl doesn't face more fallout." They finished lunch in a subdued mood. Outside, the sun shone bright, but Barron felt a gray cloud overhead. The sabotage story wasn't just rumor now, it had a human face, someone who'd risked her job to reveal the truth. Although he found comfort in knowing he wasn't imagining conspiracies, it also underscored how pervasive such tactics could be. That evening, Barron fielded more calls from reporters. He declined, not wanting Lorraine's revelations to become tabloid fodder. Yet he sensed the moment might come when the truth had to be broadcast, if only to protect others from similar bullying. For now, he kept her confidence, hoping she'd land on her feet in a healthier environment. Through it all, a simmering sense of indignation settled in Barron. The incident felt bigger than one spoiled meal. It reflected an entire structure where intimidation and influence overshadowed fairness. Though he hadn't decided on a course of action, part of him itched to fight back, not out of vengeance, but to prevent anyone else from enduring such orchestrated humiliation.
Over the following week, the question of whether to speak publicly about La Bijou weighed on Barron's mind. He remained hesitant, recalling how quickly narratives became distorted. Still, each new whisper about the incident deepened his conviction that silence might enable future bullying. Meanwhile, media speculation continued, with certain pundits suggesting the fiasco was being swept under the rug. Late one afternoon, Barron met again with Hazelton, the investor who'd pledged substantial funds to the youth-focused charity. They convened in a quiet conference room at a co-working space. After signing documents formalizing Hazelton's donation, talk drifted toward the ongoing scandal. Hazelton eyed Barron. "Let me guess, you're torn about going public." Barron nodded. "Part of me wants to preserve my privacy. Another part believes people should know how this works, how one powerful patron can manipulate an entire staff." He recounted Lorraine's predicament. Hazelton sat back, steepling his fingers. "Have you considered a controlled interview or a statement that clarifies facts without fanning flames?" Before Barron could answer, his phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. He excused himself and stepped outside to answer. "Hello?" He nearly dropped the phone when a woman identified herself as a prominent anchor at a respected news network. She wanted to schedule an on-air segment discussing incidents where power overrides fairness in public venues. "I'm not sure if," Barron began, but she pressed on. "We have credible sources linking your experience at La Bijou to a broader pattern. This isn't tabloid sensationalism. We'd ensure a balanced approach, giving you a chance to explain calmly." Her tone was professional, empathetic. Barron hesitated, remembering the swirling rumors. Perhaps a measured platform could help set the record straight. He requested time to think, ending the call. Hazelton watched him with a knowing expression. "Seems fate is nudging you," he said. Barron sighed. "Maybe. I'm not craving the spotlight, but if it protects people like Lorraine from intimidation, it might be worth it." 2 days later, Barron found himself backstage at a TV studio, nerves churning.
He'd agreed to a short segment with the anchor, who had promised no ambush tactics. As final preparations began, a producer briefed him on the show's format, reminding him to keep answers concise. The anchor joined him during a quick break, greeting him with a reassuring smile. "I appreciate your willingness to speak. We aim to highlight abuse of influence, not personal drama." When the cameras rolled, Barron felt a flash of anxiety but kept his composure. The anchor opened by outlining general cases where restaurants or hotels catered to powerful patrons at the expense of fairness. She then introduced Barron, referencing the widely circulated videos of raw lobster and charred venison. "Mr. Trump," she asked, "what do you believe happened at La Bijou?" Barron inhaled. "It seemed a specific patron pressured management to drive me out. The staff served food so undercooked it was inedible. More than once it appeared deliberate." The anchor nodded, prompting him to elaborate. Barron described how Lorraine later confirmed the sabotage, though he avoided naming her to protect her privacy. He emphasized that not everyone on staff had been malicious. Some were coerced. "How did you feel?" the anchor asked gently. Barron paused. "At first, just frustrated and hungry. Then I realized it symbolized something bigger, how easily intimidation can overtake basic decency." They briefly discussed broader implications. The moral hazards when businesses fear losing wealthy clientele more than they value fairness. The anchor steered clear of sensationalizing, focusing instead on structural issues. Barron felt relief flooding him. He also mentioned that while he had no plans to sue, he hoped exposing such behavior would deter it. "No one should experience orchestrated harassment when they just want a meal," he said. After the segment ended, the anchor thanked him off camera. "I'm sorry you faced such hostility," she said. "Hopefully, this sparks real dialogue." Barron nodded, shoulders lighter. He exited the studio, mind whirling with a mix of apprehension and cautious optimism. He'd finally spoken openly, and now the public would form their opinions. The next morning, his phone buzzed incessantly with messages. Some congratulated him for speaking out, others accused him of seeking attention. A popular columnist wrote a piece applauding his measured tone, calling it the rare interview that sidesteps theatrics to confront a real concern. Barron felt heartened, though he braced for inevitable backlash from those who disliked him no matter what. Lorraine also reached out to say thank you. She'd seen the interview and felt validated. "People needed to know the staff was under orders," she texted. Barron told her he admired her courage for leaving. She replied that she'd found a new server job at a smaller cafe, one that valued integrity over intimidation. He felt genuine relief, wishing her the best.
Meanwhile, La Bijou's management stayed silent at first. Then a short statement appeared on their social media, claiming the fiasco was a misunderstanding caused by kitchen errors. They insisted they never intentionally served raw food. The statement avoided mention of any powerful patron. Nonetheless, public sentiment skewed skeptical, especially given numerous eyewitness accounts and the viral videos. A wave of negative reviews criticized La Bijou's ethics, overshadowing even their once praised cuisine. Barron observed from a distance. He had no interest in gloating. His interview had been enough. Days passed, and other news stories took center stage. The La Bijou scandal receded from headlines, leaving behind a reputational bruise for the restaurant and a renewed conversation about undue influence. As time wore on, Barron found solace in having spoken his truth without succumbing to rage or theatrics. Amid these changes, his charity work advanced. Hazelton's donation galvanized other supporters, allowing them to open 2 pilot programs for underserved youth. Barron poured himself into that project, grateful for a tangible success that contrasted sharply with the negativity he'd encountered at La Bijou. On a quiet Thursday evening, Barron visited a small, family-run restaurant off a side street, a place recommended for its cozy atmosphere and honest cooking. There, he savored a bowl of homemade soup, uninterrupted. No one glared at him, no staff served suspiciously raw ingredients, and the manager was simply delighted to see a new patron. As he paid the modest bill, he smiled, reflecting that decency could be found in unpretentious corners.
Walking outside, he felt the city's pulse under the street lamps. His mind drifted to the servers who'd tried to sabotage him under orders, and the many bystanders who had watched, uncertain. He thought of Lorraine, now free to work without fear, and Hazelton, who recognized that the problem ran deeper than one restaurant. Barron recognized that he couldn't fix every instance of intimidation or bigotry, but by quietly standing his ground and eventually speaking up, he'd contributed to peeling back at least one layer of hypocrisy. He glanced up at the skyline. Life in the public eye would always have its share of conflict, but he vowed not to let it erode his sense of self or empathy. Even the darkest corners of a fancy dining room couldn't overshadow the possibility of positive change. With that resolve, he continued down the sidewalk, aware that though new obstacles might await, he'd found a measure of peace in the simple act of calling out wrongdoing. Sometimes that was all it took to begin restoring balance in a world so often skewed by power and prejudice.